For more on this discussion, we're joined by Mametlwe Sebei, the President of General Industries Workers Union of South Africa. Mametlwe, I appreciate your time this evening. Just give us a sense of your reaction to this announcement from the inquiry on the recusal of the advocate.
We welcome the decision of the Commission. We do believe that this does speak very well to the victims, many of whom obviously are the migrants. We have campaigned for his recusal precisely to defend the impartiality, to defend the fairness of the process, which we believe would only be restored when you have judicial officers and commissioners whose integrity and credibility is impeccable. And in this situation, Commissioner Makhubela is somebody who, through his relentless spewing of hatred and prejudices against the migrants, particularly from 2017 to 2022, means that he is compromised, he has a prejudice, and that itself compromises the integrity and the credibility of the Commission.
So what were some of the specific reasons cited by Justice Sisi Khampepe for recusing Commissioner Thulani Makhubela?
The Justice Khampepe relied on a prisoner court decision about the test on whether judicial officers should recuse themselves. Now, Advocate Makhubela is not a judicial officer, but of course, he is an officer of court, he's an advocate of high court, and this is the reason that he is being appointed in this judicial inquiry, and therefore should meet the same test that judges have to meet. And that is to say, they must be capable of, dealing with the matter impartially and, of course, with fairness. And in this respect, his prejudices against some of the victims of that fire means that he's not going to be able to deal with that. I mean, some of the posts that were shared with the Commission shows that this is somebody who, like many, of course, in the political elite that sought to scapegoat the migrants for this crisis, has been bashing the victims, scapegoating the migrants for the crisis of housing, the crisis in the healthcare sector, the crisis of unemployment or poverty, and many others. And we do believe that what this Commission has to be tasked with, it has to be tasked with, of course, making impartial finding based on nothing else but objective facts. And we do believe that any such inquiry will be able to establish that that tragedy, of course, is an indictment on the city for its criminal neglect of the inner city building and infrastructure, which affect not only the data building, but we have seen many buildings, including the one that the Commission initially was supposed to, was supposed to host the hearings, either gutted or threatened by fire. And we think that rot on the very foundation, in the very infrastructure of the city, is a reflection of the years of the criminal neglect to upgrade, to improve. And in this situation, there is over 220-something buildings that, could provide a decent accommodation for the inner city residences which have been abandoned, which have been hijacked, and meaning that you have criminal syndicates that extort money of poor, disparate people to pay rental over property that they do not own and to pay the tariffs that they do not provide. We think the city must address the problem of housing, not only in the inner city, but across Joburg. There's a backlog of 500,000 housing units in Joburg, and the city is building houses at a snail pace. They only built 2,500 last year, which means it will take them over 200 years just for them to be able to meet the current backlog. That's unacceptable. And it's not only a problem with the city of Johannesburg, it's a problem with the country as a whole. We believe that the housing crisis alone is an indictment on the ANC government, on its neoliberal policy and cuts on spending, particularly on public housing.
I'd like to rewind a little bit and go back to the application, which was brought in by the Law Centre, the Socio-Economic Rights Institute of South Africa, and the Inner City Federation some weeks ago. Now, what are the implications of you or these parties if they had not brought this to the attention of the authorities, does it bring into question the appointment of commissioners of such standing? So where allegations exist, for instance, against Advocate Makhubela, and the fact that he's still appointed, but only because it was raised was this issue then fleshed out?
It is. We don't think this appointment was an innocent omission, because let's be clear about it. This is not somebody who we charge of making, a xenophobic comment once in a while, which could have been easily missed by any person who was doing a profile check on the people that were being appointed. This is somebody whose whole social media is overwhelmingly dominated by support for organizations like Operation Dudula, South Africa First, bashing of the migrants, scapegoating them for all sorts of problems. This is his main public profile in the social media space. So any basic check would have revealed that. What this reveals is the outlook of the elite, the political elite, including those in a provincial government that have established this city, that have established this commission, who, as we know, have been seeking for a way that they could divert attention from their own capability in creating a very catastrophic housing situation. We are speaking now about the inner city of Johannesburg, which is what is catching attention, because this is supposed to be a world-class top African city in this country. We are having a situation in many informal settlements, in many urban centers across the whole country, where fires are gutting and killing thousands and thousands of black working class poor people in those informal settlements, where 13% of the population are staying, where there is, or rather, they are living in a coalface of a major housing crisis and a major housing backlog, which has not only been not getting better, but in fact has been worsening. Let's remember, when the ANC took over, the housing backlog in 1995 was only 1.5 million houses in short. Today it stands a staggering 3.7 million housing units. That is livelihoods, is the lives of many working class people who are living in squalor, in dilapidation, in conditions simply incompatible with human dignity. That's the reason that part of our demand is for a mass public works program that will ensure that we build millions of the housing units we need, but also other infrastructure, at the same time as we are creating jobs and combating poverty and crime that goes with it.
Do you expect Advocate Makhubela to challenge the recusal?
Well, whether he does that or not is immaterial. Anyway, let's remember that he was offered an opportunity to make representation, and from what I gathered from the judge, he actually made fail to make those representations. And that will only be on the basis that, the evidence that was presented by the legal representatives of the victims and some of the organizations that form part of our campaign is impeccable. Is simply unchallengeable. It is a clear trait of, a relentless media campaigns that are characterized by the prejudices that, are definitively, xenophobic. And of course, he has commented in relation to the very issues that are at stake here, which of course suggests that the housing crisis we have in this country, as with many other problems, including crimes, poverty, and unemployment, are caused by the migrants. When we say we want an impartial commission that, of course, would investigate why is it that these buildings were allowed to be in the state, that a fire on breaking out could cause so much devastation. Lots of people have lost lives. Lots of people have sustained major injuries. Lots of people have lost, their property and the means of livelihood. There must be accountability, and we think there must be accountability, including a criminal liability for those that were responsible for these conditions in the inner city, and of course, some of these criminal syndicates that have taken advantage of the crisis created by the criminal neglect of the public infrastructure in the inner city, who are, of course, extorting poor, disparate people, who are seeking a shelter in a city which is simply, not hospitable to many poor working class people who are forced to travel to rural, from rural South Africa and, of course, other countries of sub-Saharan Africa, where they are here to seek means of decent livelihoods in the job opportunities that are there, but also other economic opportunities.
Now, your expectation, obviously, is for this inquiry to come to a close as quickly as possible. So how does the recusal of Commissioner Makhubela affect the overall proceedings of this commission?
Well, I would say better late than ever in this situation, because having a commission whose credibility and integrity is hopelessly compromised by a commissioner who is clearly prejudiced against a significant layer of the interested parties in this situation, being those of the victims who were the migrants, means that there is no way we would reasonably expect that the commission would conduct itself with impartiality and the fairness that is required of the courts and, of course, every judicial tribunal, including commissions of this nature. And I say that once they had decided that, or if they had decided to retain him, I think even our own participation would have been in question. But I also think that many victims, not only would they be traumatized, but I doubt very much that they would even want to invest with credibility and such a commission, which will be a joke in this situation. So I think this decision is sound in law, is sound in facts, and I don't see how Makhubela can successfully appeal it, because I think the case has been clearly made out on the balance of probability that the integrity and credibility of this commission will be periled by his positions and, of course, public declarations on these issues.
Mametlwe, you will recall that at the time of the fire, the city came out, and so did the government by extension, to try and assist many of these immigrants, both illegal and otherwise. But many of them did not come up, did not turn up, because they did not trust the authorities. Does this decision by the authorities, so to speak, vindicate them? Does it build some form of trust between illegal migrants and other immigrants with the government?
Well, the way that the government treated the victims is appalling to see that. I think we've got to be very clear about it. Those that turn up, many of them, as we are speaking, are under detention at Lindela, a detention center, right? Who are awaiting deportation. And of course, many South Africans also that I spoke to, were just shocked at not only the bureaucratic indifference, but the impression that I think they faced from the state, some of whom were required to produce IDs that they've lost in the fire. And I spoke, and many of people who actually attend for our demonstrations were locals. Some of them were in that building. In fact, many of them were the victims of that fire. Instead of our government being able to help and come to our aid, they've actually been persecuting us and, of course, prosecuting us for all sorts of frivolous, charges that have no basis in law. You can't expect someone who has just lost everything, including his identification, to produce them, and when they can't, you then put them under touch. That is a kind of treatment that they have received. In addition to the fact, of course, that people who have lost not only means or rather a shelter where they stay, but also means of livelihood. Many of the temporary and emergency shelters that was extended to them expired, and upon expiry, the government has not been willing to come to the party. And some have been, of course, promised a new site, but very far from the city. And you would understand that these are people who are forced to stay in, a degrading conditions, to say the least. Some of your media, houses have, highlighted the conditions in these buildings. They are appalling. It's a kind of conditions you will not even wish for your pet. they forced to stay in these conditions because this is the only way that they could eke out a living, either from poor-paying jobs in the inner city or from street and small trading in the streets of the inner city. And they can't afford a transport from those areas. So that is a kind of a treatment which I must say I'm not so sure that this decision itself would be enough to establish the trust between government and, of course, the victims. However, insofar as the commission, it does send a message that the Commissioner, Justice Khampepe, is serious about conducting an impartial and a fair process, and I think that would be an incentive enough for many, as we would urge them to come and make representation. Ultimately, we do think that the working class need to establish its own positions and perspectives on these issues. And that is the reason that alongside making representation but also participating in this official judicial commission of inquiry, we have also been calling for independent working class commission in order to tap not only on the experiences of the tragedy, but also the work that has been done by the activists, the inner city, resident federation, the inner city resource center, and many activists who have been working on this space of public housing within the inner city, in the city of Johannesburg in general, but across the country, to say what program would be required to overcome this crisis. And one of the things that have come out is that there is a need for upgrading of a lot of these buildings that, if upgraded and well maintained, they can provide a decent accommodation where people could live with dignity. We also think that there is a need, as I've said earlier on, for a mass public works program to ensure that on the basis of the public works, we are able to build houses in sufficient number. Part of the problem with regard to housing is a current outsourcing, tender-based system where billions are lost on corrupt tenders instead of going to investment in the public housing that we agented. So we want the state and the department, particularly public works, to establish capacity, as it happened in the past, where government was actually building houses, and the money meant for housing went for the housing of the poor working class people who needed those particular houses.
Now, did I get you correctly in saying that some of the survivors of the Marshalltown fire are being detained at Lindela?
Yes, they are being detained. Of course, our lawyers have been helping them, but nonetheless, they have been detained. And I mean, these are people who already have been brutalized by the fire. They've been traumatized. They've lost everything. Instead of a caring attitude that seeks to find a progressive and a just solution, not only to the immediate issues that gave rise to the tragedy, but more than that, they are now being victimized. We think that this is actually telling about this government, but not only this government, but the entire political elite. Lest we forget that it wasn't just the ANC. It was the entire political establishment who came gun blazing and, of course, bashing the victims and blaming the migrants for the crisis of their city. Because ultimately, the crisis in the inner city is part of the broader crisis of capitalism and a broader crisis of housing, which is not unique to Johannesburg, as I've said, but also is not even unique to South Africa. What capitalism does inherently is to create areas of, concentrated development by underdevelopment of vast areas. In this case, development of Johannesburg is predicated basically of, lack of any viable economies and industrial base across the vast parts of a rural South Africa, but also a rural, Southern Africa. And on this basis, people are forced to, move to areas like Joburg and other urban centers in search of job and other economic opportunities, but also just in search of services. I'm from an area where, the government has been building a hospital. I mean, I'm, taking this, in Khanchabile, there's been a hospital that has been under construction since I was a young man, going to a secondary school. 30 years, or not 30 years, but almost 25 years later, it is still a community healthcare center. Every time a member of my family is sick, I have to use the address, of my flat, in the inner Pretoria, just for them to get a decent healthcare. That is not unique to me. It's not unique to very few families, but it's a reality. People are forced to come to Johannesburg at the same time. So the issue of a demand for housing is a reality we have got to reckon, both in a context of the poverty of the working class, but also in a context of the growing population. That's why I'm saying we need a mass public works program, but for that, we need to bring the construction and the industry under a public ownership, and there is a capacity there. We see them when they are building malls and other private developments, how efficient and capable they are of constructing a quality public housing, but also facilities for commercial trade. We think this capacity can be put to use in overcoming the housing crisis through this mass public works and mass public housing program that we are talking about.
Mametlwe Sebei, he was a president, giving us his thoughts on the recusal of Advocate Thulani Makhubela in the Marshalltown inquiry over anti-foreigner posts. Appreciate your time this evening.